Welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen. You're seeing it? Cool. All right, welcome. We're so thankful and excited that all of you decided to join on your lunch break. I know it's tough in the middle of the week, but hopefully you'll enjoy this conversation today. I'll introduce myself. My name is Naishin. My pronouns are she and her. I am a tech worker who has been in healthcare software product management for the past 10 years or so. I'm also a mom of a 4- and 7-year-old living in Seattle. I've been increasingly interested in getting involved in civic engagement and economic justice for a few years now. But of course, being a working mom, I had trouble finding time for that. So in November, I actually decided to take a break from tech and explore policy and advocacy work at the local and state level. I was interested in a lot of issues from universal healthcare to affordable housing to economic justice. But I realized that to have all these nice things, the first thing we need is sufficient revenue to fund them. And so that kind of led me to Emily at Balance Our Tax Code, who you'll hear from later, who welcomed me into the fold. So what we'll cover today was mostly news to me a year ago and has really opened my eyes, and I'm hoping it will be beneficial for you as well. And we're really fortunate today to have some of the top experts in our state join, and really glad that they made the time. All right, I'm just going to introduce Tech for Housing briefly. So Tech for Housing is a community of tech workers who believe that the tech boom can and should benefit every resident, and we want to be part of the solution. So our historical focus has been affordable housing and land use, and for all of those, progressive revenue is a key component, and so it's been a priority for us as well. I just joined in the past couple months. We were actually dormant for about 2 years during COVID, so we're just starting to get back up. We've had a couple of small group meetings, but we're looking for new members to shape our work going forward, and we'll talk more at the end about how you can get involved. I wanted to quickly shout out my colleague Suresh, who is also from Tech for Housing, who's helped me a ton getting this set up, is running our Zoom, and has been a huge help. Thank you, Suresh. All right, here's our agenda. I'm not going to read it. You can look at it yourself. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We have people monitoring. We might take some quick questions during the presentation. We have a lot of content, so we'll probably save a lot of them for the Q&A. We're scheduled to end at 12:45, but we'll probably stick around a little longer if there are more questions. And then a quick note, so we'll talk about tech workers generally, but obviously tech workers come in all forms. Not everyone earns a high salary. We know that even those who are paid relatively well are feeling the squeeze in a city like this, have been forced to move out. And so we're not here to shame or blame or speak for all tech workers, while we may talk in general terms and provide statistics overall. So we acknowledge that everyone has a different story and varying levels of wealth and privilege. We'll also be putting various links in the chat. Don't worry about getting them all right away. We'll follow up with an email with them all after the event as well. All right, so I know everyone's coming out of their workday. You probably have your mind in a billion places. So let's take a moment and just ground ourselves in what the goals are when we talk about taxes. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. Let's just visualize your ideal community. What attributes does it have? What might be 3 words that we use to describe it? So I'll be quiet right now and let you think. All right, hopefully you've had some good thoughts. I'm going to put mine here in the chat, and I encourage you to do so as well. For me, the top things I thought about was affordability. So everyone who wishes to live in Seattle, I'm hoping can be able to afford to live here. A lot of people who work here can't afford to live here, from teachers, nurses, to baristas and grocery store workers. I know our daycare staff, we see fast turnover because people are driving from all over and it's unsustainable. Walkability is important as well, being able to get to essential things, grocery, pharmacy, healthcare. Having supported schools, we have one child in public school. I know a lot of parents are feeling the schools are unsupported and not resourced and turning to private options, and that kind of, disperses the community bit as well. So please continue to feel free to share in the chat. I see some great things. I think the common thing is that to get where we want to, we need revenue for things like schools and transit and sidewalks and affordable housing. And I think that no matter who we are or where we come from, most of us want similar things, and we work hard to provide for our families and take care of our communities. Due to the inequity baked into our system, though, I think that can be harder to do for some than others. And so I'm going to pass it off in a minute here, but before we do so, I just wanted to do a quick poll and see where you all think, may have no idea, but just you can guess if you want, but where you think Washington stacks in terms of fairness of our tax code. All right, I will end the poll because I think most people have responded. So I'm showing the results. Most of you seemingly think we're in the bottom half. Some think we're less. You'll get the answer in just a minute here. First, I'd like to introduce Annie Nicholas from Washington Budget and Policy Center. Annie is a revenue policy expert. He's a key advisor to legislators, community organizations. He's personally helped me grow a lot through answering a lot of detailed questions. And so we're really lucky to have him here today. Andy, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Naishin. Big thanks to you and Suresh and for all of you guys for pulling this together, coordinating this, and for allowing me into this space. Again, I'm just super grateful to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I'm currently a resident of Renton, born and raised in Washington State. I did grad school out in Washington, D.C. and worked out there for a year, and I've been doing state and local tax code, public finance policy for about 13 years, maybe 15 years now, 13 here in Washington, sort of analyzing this. And I'm definitely a Washington State enthusiast. I think there's a ton we get right out here, and there's an obvious ton of natural beauty. There's a reason we didn't stay in the DC area. We love it out here. But one thing that we don't get too right is our state and local tax code, and I'll go into a little bit more about that in a moment. But just like one other personal note, I am just so grateful to be here. I am personally just a really strong believer in the role of science, technology, humanist philosophy and thinking as roles for building a better world. And so I'm grateful to be in community with you all who do that as part of your jobs. So a little bit about the organization. Next slide, please. If you're not familiar with the Budget and Policy Center, we're a research and advocacy organization. We're based in Seattle, but we're a statewide organization, especially in pandemic times. We're flung all across the state. But our mission is to use research and analysis to advance the well-being of Washington communities, improve the economic security and social opportunity of all in the state, and support the essential role of government in promoting a just and prosperous society. And so I'll cover, that's kind of who we are. Today, I'm going to go over like high level what the state and local tax code looks like, how it sort of fails to live up to our values as a state, but then talk about some really important advances that were made just in the last couple of years. So next slide, please. So this is like kind of pulling back 50,000 foot. This is pre-2021, and I'll get to how this is going to be a little bit different. But basically at the state level, and this isn't much different if you throw in local taxes, this is just the state taxes that support the operating budget. We levy two kinds of taxes, fundamental. By far, the largest source of revenue, one way or the other, comes from taxes on consumption, things that people buy. The most obvious one that people recognize in there is the retail sales and use tax. That's a little bit over half of all state tax revenues, at least for the operating budget. But it includes a lot of other things in that bucket that people are less familiar with. So the one that people are somewhat surprised at is the business and occupation tax, or the B&O tax. And that is nominally levied on businesses, and businesses they'll calculate it and send the check to the Department of Revenue. But most economists would agree that the structure of that tax really is a hidden sales tax, that it's passed along to consumers predominantly, both here and exported, in the form of higher prices of things that people buy at the cash register. But of course, your receipt doesn't show that. So it's this sort of hidden regressive sales tax, the B&O tax. And then of course, we have taxes on public utilities, and the variety of sin taxes, cigarettes, alcohol, and of course, for the last decade or so, now marijuana in Washington state. So that's kind of the biggest chunk of taxes in Washington. A much smaller share of revenue comes from taxes on property and wealth. Again, the obvious one there is at the state level, but also local levels, is the state property tax levy. But also the state estate tax, the real estate excise tax, and a few other things fall into this bucket as well. But again, 50,000 foot, this is kind of the state tax code that we have. It's this kind of lopsided two-legged stool that doesn't balance very well. Next slide, please. So taxes can promote all kinds of different goals. I'm going to talk about two primary ones today and how this tax code doesn't work very well. First, the primary reason, as Naishin mentioned, the primary reason to levy taxes at all is to fund important things that benefit the entire community. And so we look at how does the tax serve that goal of maintaining, funding, growing adequately with the economy and changing needs for all of the investments that we care about. And then, of course, the tax code really ought to push back against bigger problematic dynamics in the economy, rising inequality along racial lines, economic lines, gender and ability lines. People want a tax code that certainly doesn't exacerbate those things and ideally helps to mitigate things. But again, our tax code really doesn't serve either of these two goals very well. On that first point, how does the tax code sort of fare at funding public priorities reliably? The chart that I'm about to show shows total state taxes as a share of the economy going back to 1995. And you can see there's been a pretty significant decline. So yeah, you go back to fiscal year 1995. You can see we were collecting almost 7 cents on every dollar in the state economy as measured by total state personal income. You start going forward, you see in the 07-09 era when the Great Recession struck, there was this precipitous decline. That was what's interesting about that. Remember, this is a share of the economy. So not only were taxes falling at this point, but they were falling faster than the economy overall. And that was, you know, I joke, it's not a joke really, but I've now been able to say 2 times in my career, we're going through the worst recession of the post-World War II era. You know, it's really saying something when your tax code is so unhinged from the economy that it falls faster than the economy itself. And then you go forward from 2009 on, and it's really pretty stagnant. We were just stuck at these recession levels of taxes. Even when the economy was rebounding, we were just kind of stuck. There was a little bit of an uptick in the last couple of years, but unless we make changes, you can see we're projected to sort of fall right back down into that declining thing. And so I can talk more about what's driving this trend during Q&A. But again, you pull back, we're looking at a 30% decline in the adequacy of the tax code over just a few decades. And that's, you know, again, you want a tax code that is keeping pace with the economy and community, things that communities need to thrive. So it doesn't do a very good job at its fundamental purpose, which is to fund public priorities in the short and the long runs. But of course, and as Naishin really set me up really great to talk about here, the tax code is also deeply inequitable in Washington state. And yep, some of you may have seen this chart. What we're looking at here is households in Washington state broken up into income groups along the income scale. So at the far left-hand side, you can see the poorest fifth of households in Washington state, those earning less than about $24,000 per year, pay almost a fifth, almost 20% of their annual incomes in state and local taxes in Washington state. But if you go all the way to the other end, those at the very top 1%, and you need a minimum of about $546,000 per year to be in this group, you pay less than 3% of your annual income in Washington state and local taxes. And as was alluded to earlier, the distance between those two, between the richest and the poorest, is wider in Washington state than in any other state in the country. It's a surprising thing to hear, meaning that we have the most regressive tax code of any state in the country. And I've shown this chart for many years, and a lot of times I get faced with people just reject it. They're like, no, that's not the Washington state that I live in. But sadly, it is. It is just one feature that we really need to work hard to improve. Of course, this is just kind of again, pulling back, looking at averages within different income groups. When we look at when you map this against other problematic dynamics, to put it mildly, racism, sexism, ableism, you see that this is a tax code that really compounds those problems. And by contrast, it also really benefits wealthy white people in Washington state in particular. And it's kind of no accident that we've been stuck with this system for a long time, given who has the power and who's in control. So next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is the richest 15% of just white households in Washington state. And we're looking at the share of the total income they receive that is generated in the state annually versus the share of total taxes that they contribute to supporting the common good. And I think this is really damning. The richest 15% of white households take in nearly half of the total income generated in the state, and yet contribute less than a third of the total taxes that support schools and healthcare and parks and all of the things that we care about. So again, it's not just that the tax code is regressive and unfair, it's that it really promotes and exacerbates racial injustice and white supremacist culture in a deeply problematic way. But it's not all bad news. Next slide, please. We and many of the partners on this call and many of the partners that are not here have been raising awareness about these problems for a long time now. And in 2021, we had sort of built a level of momentum and awareness, and we had a window, and we actually got lawmakers to take some real meaningful steps towards righting this ship. We're not anywhere close to where we all need or want to be, but by being smart and disciplined and crafting really good policies, we were able to notch some victories. And the two significant ones I want to highlight are the Working Families Tax Credit. That is a sort of focused, targeted state tax cut that benefits people at the middle and the bottom end of the income scale, those who have the highest effective tax rates, starting just and Maggie's going to talk a lot more, or maybe Maggie will talk a lot more. Maggie knows a lot more about this than I do, but households in Washington state and those income groups are going to get up to $1,200 a year starting in 2023. And we're looking at upwards of 500,000 households who are going to benefit from this. So that's a huge advance towards reducing that really unacceptably high rate for people at the middle and the bottom end of the income scale. And on the other side, we got the legislature to enact a new tax on concentrated capital gains wealth. The legislature approved a 7% tax on essentially profits from stocks and bonds over $250,000 or $250,000 per year. And that was also a really important move. It's going to generate over $500 million. In fact, by the estimates I just looked at the other day, suggest over 800 million by FY27, all of which is dedicated to K through 12 education, early learning and childcare, and school construction. So it's going to be especially beneficial to rural areas of the state that have suffered from uninvestment, disinvestment, lack of investment for way too long.
Hey,
This
Andy, I'm
is
just going to interject for a second. We're going a
absolutely.
little close on time, so
Oh, sorry about that.
I'll speed through.
Yep. Bottom line is this is really only a tax on the extreme wealthy. The richest 0.2% of households actually have slightly new data now. It's going to be 8,000, which is 0.2% of the population will ever be subjected or will ever pay this tax. And collections, again, will start next April. And when you combine the impact of these two things, next slide, please. You'll see that we're indeed making progress. We're not getting anywhere, but if you're in the middle or low end of the income scale, you'll see your annual tax bills fall by up to 1.1%. And by contrast, if you're at the very top, you'll see your annual tax bill increase by about 0.5 percentage point. Not too much to ask for a significant and important investment in communities across Washington state. Again, this is hardly the be all end all. We know we need to make more progress. And so just a few of the options that those of us that are working in this space are looking at and advocating for include, next slide, please. And again, this is not at all an exhaustive list. This is just a few of the things that people are really starting to put some energy into. Top one being this billionaire wealth tax, which our friends at the Economic Opportunity Institute and Representative Noel Frame, chair of the House Finance Committee, have been strong advocates for in recent years. That could be a real game changer in terms of progressive taxation, but also the state estate tax, which is one of the few bright spots in our tax code. There's plenty of room to expand and increase that and generate a lot of revenue for important public priorities. And of course, we should make that working families tax credit a lot bolder, more expansive and bigger. And there's a coalition, the Working Families Tax Credit Coalition, that is putting a lot of work into both making sure the current program is effective and successful and accessible, but that also that we can build on and improve that. And then finally, the city of Seattle you may be aware did the Jumpstart Acts, which is a sort of corporate high earners tax on high end payrolls. There's no reason why state lawmakers couldn't learn from the wisdom. That is, I don't have to tell you, it's been a highly successful tax, exceeding revenue projections, or collections are exceeding that. So there's certainly room to expand that concept at the state level and generate a lot more priorities and further help balance the tax code. So again, that was a lot. I'm happy to take on more questions during Q&A, and I'll turn it back to Naishin.
All right, thank you so much, Andy. That was a lot of information. Hopefully you're able to absorb some of it. I'm going to move us along since we do have a lot to cover. And again, we'll stay later for Q&A if we do run over. I'm going to pass it to Emily Parzybach. She's Executive Director of Balance Our Tax Code. As I mentioned, this is one of the first groups I joined. They've been super welcoming. Emily spent, a lot of her time, guiding me through a lot of different things in this world. And so I'm super thankful to her. Emily.
Thank you. And thanks, Andy, for setting the stage. I'm glad to be here with all of you, even in these Zoom times. As she just mentioned, my name is Emily Parzybach. I'm the Executive Director at Balance Our Tax Code. I use she and her pronouns. I'm coming to you from Beacon Hill in Seattle, which is my home. Like Andy, I'm a lifelong Washingtonian and left the state a little bit for school, but have been around. And I have worked in progressive politics, primarily running coalitions for quite a while. Right now, I run Balance Our Tax Code, which is sort of in many ways a home for the Revenue Coalition. And I think, as you've just seen, so much of what Andy talked about beautifully, thank you, Andy, is, very data focused. And you've seen a lot of, charts and graphs and analysis. And I think that that's incredibly important for us to look at and study as we do this work. I think that that translates, and sometimes we miss this step, into, real impact in our communities. And so when you look at that chart of the upside down tax code, for example, like, you should think of families who are trying to buy diapers for their new kiddo. You should think of families that are like spending their income and are trying to put food on the table in the midst of a pandemic. When you look at that chart going down through the 2007 and 8 recession, going down through this recession, you should think of families that have lost their primary breadwinner's income during that time. You should think of families who are trying to make ends meet in these really difficult economic circumstances. And so I think the really critical piece of what the coalition does is sort of grounds this, because we all can kind of talk esoterically about the tax code. And I say that not to minimize Andy's work, which is so critical, but we have to kind of remember that actually all of this is grounded in human experience. It's grounded in what our community members are facing. It's grounded in what our neighbors are going through. And that's sort of compass north for us as we do our work. So next slide, please. Our coalition serves working families. As mentioned, our board is comprised of some of the great folks that are in this room today and many others focused on various issues. What you'll notice about this board and about our larger coalition is that folks do all different kinds of issue work, because as Naishin so beautifully said at the beginning of this, the thing that brings us all together is knowing that our tax code is upside down and that that actually impacts all of these different issue areas, from housing to healthcare to everything else. Next slide, please. So we have 80 plus coalition members. We have me, I'm the staff. That's my photo with long hair. And our 80 plus coalition members come together because we all know that we actually have to grow the amount of money we have to be able to invest in the really critical work that everyone at the table does. Within that, we have a policy and lobbying committee, we have an organizing committee, and we have a communications committee. And these really allow us to kind of come together and align around shared scopes of work. So even though there are many, many organizations, we're all kind of marching in the same direction towards balancing the tax code. Next slide. So what we do is we, as I mentioned, have these committees. So we communicate, we organize, and we pass policy. And we also try and do community or capacity building and education work. So as a coalition, our goal is to kind of help folks be more effective at talking about this issue, tying it to their work, and doing advocacy to make change. Next slide. So I'm going to walk you through a few things. As we've talked about the capital gains tax, I wanted to just kind of clarify a bit. And in particular, I wanted to talk about the really critical work we did getting feedback and thinking about how this policy impacts the community as we built it. So I'm going to do some myth busting for you of some things you might have heard or might know or might assume, et cetera, about capital gains. Next slide. So one thing that gets kind of thrown around by our opposition sometimes is that it will apply to real estate or retirement savings. We hear folks saying like, oh God, I'm really worried about my retirement being devastated by this capital gains tax. In fact, we wrote the law really specifically so that it exempts property that most Washingtonians own, like real estate and retirement. We actually talked to farmers across the state. We talked to folks who are on fixed incomes and are on retirement. We talked to dozens, hundreds of people as we crafted this tax to think about how we could really make it so that we are taxing the very, very wealthiest folks in our state who are realizing these profits. We are not trying to impact people's retirement or other, modes that keep them in their homes, that keep them stable, et cetera. And we were really committed to making sure this tax doesn't touch that. Next step. Capital gains tax will hurt small businesses in our economy is another one. In fact, it's really good for our economy, and there's so many reasons why. But we know that, in fact, as Andy pointed out, the wealthiest folks in our community are not paying their fair share. That's at the same time as we see a lot of innovation in our area. And, I was raised by a father who was in business, and he used to always kind of say to me, actually, as someone running a business, that like one of the most critical things about running a business in the community for him was having a healthy community. He was like, I need well-educated people. I need good infrastructure. Like I need a happy, healthy workforce that can get to work. And that is actually like what makes running a business here great for me. And so we know actually that taxing people equitably and having the money we need to invest in the infrastructure that builds a really healthy and thriving community and economy, net is good for the economy and good for the people in it. And so, we know that this leads to actually more innovation, more stability, and a better workforce. Next. Capital gains tax is actually an income tax. In fact, it's an excise tax. This does get a little wonky, but it's only triggered, as folks were talking about in the chat, upon the sale of high-end financial assets. And just to put a finer point on it, as folks have already mentioned, you have to be realizing a really enormous amount of capital gains for this tax to apply to you. So this tax is not applying to people who have, a couple of small stocks and they're benefiting and getting, making $10,000 a year to add to their income. That's not who this tax is for. And so, as we mentioned, it's annually making $250,000 or more on high-end financial assets upon sale. So it's really just targeted at the very, very largest capital gains realizations. Next step. So then finally, I also wanted to just kind of share, as I mentioned, we are a coalition of 80 organizations. Andy talked about passing the working families tax credit and the capital gains tax. We're really proud of that. And Andy also talked about some of these next steps. I wanted to also mention that the coalition continues to do this work. And every year we're together advocating at the legislature. We put together a policy priority set. We do hearings. We do LTEs, letters to the editor. We do all kinds of work. And so if this is something that you'd like to be involved in, we're going to be going back this year to ask for a wealth tax, to ask for an improved estate tax, to ask for a guaranteed basic income pilot program in Washington state. So we're doing work on kind of both ends of the tax code. And that's what I wanted to put a finer point on here, is that, it's not enough to just realize more money on progressive taxation, which we do in fact want to do. We want to ask wealthy folks in our community to pay their share and contribute, but we also want to put cash back in the pockets of folks who are paying too much. Because again, to bring this back, this is about the day-to-day experience of the people who are in our lives, who are making our coffee, who are our neighbors, who are our friends, who our kids go to their houses and play with. This is actually about a community that is healthy and collectively contributing. So we'll be kind of continuing to work on that. We'd love to have you in the work we're going to tell you at the end. And with that, I'm going to pass it. Thanks, everybody.
I'm going to just fire off another quick poll right here to see, now that you know so much about the capital gains tax, we'll see how many people here would actually pay it. While that's up, I'm going to introduce Treasurer Mackley, who's Executive Director of Invest in Washington Now. It's another organization that is focused on progressive revenue in Washington, and we're super excited to have her here. She's going to talk a little bit about what is going on with this tax right now.
Well, thank you so much. It is great to be here today. And I do have to say, it's great to work with the coalition of folks that are on this call, as well as the broader coalition of folks who have been engaged in this fight for many years. I'm going to take a few minutes here to talk a little bit about capital gains and where it's at right now, and what we have moving forward. But before we do that, if we can skip to the next slide, tell you a little bit about Invest in Washington and who we are. So as mentioned, my name is Treasurer Mackley, and I'm the Executive Director with Invest in Washington Now. We are a relatively new organization. We were formed about 2 years ago. And our purpose and our charge is to build broad-based support for progressive revenue to help us, move the ball forward in terms of making sure that we can keep money flowing into our communities, that we can invest in the people in our communities, and that we ask the wealthy few and profitable corporations to do their part. As part of that, we've been building a broad-based group of supporters from across the state. We have about 70,000 folks who are joining and are part of the Invest in Washington Now community, and have really been focused on moving some of these pieces forward. A little bit about my history. I've been doing this work and working in progressive politics for about 20 years, leading advocacy and electoral campaigns in 7 states. So it's been a lot of fun. This has been an issue that's been close to my heart for a really long time. Let's go to the next slide. So where are we at with capital gains? Well, capital gains, we heard a little bit about it both from Andy and from Emily in learning about what the law does. One of the things that we didn't mention, though, is how long folks have been fighting for this. So, one of the things that when this bill was very first introduced, it was introduced about 12 years ago, and it's taken us about that long to pass it through the legislature. We were able to pass it finally in 2021, which was absolutely phenomenal. And it took the work of all this community coming together, a really focused effort. And we were thrilled with that. Once we passed it, we expected that the folks who were opposed to this legislation were going to file a lawsuit, which they did. In fact, not only did they file one, but they filed 2. So we have a legal fight happening as well as a ballot fight happening. So I'm going to take a minute first to talk a little bit about the legal fight. So there were 2 lawsuits that were filed in Douglas County. Most of the time, lawsuits like this are actually heard in Thurston County, but this one was filed in Douglas County at the trial court level. It has moved through the trial court, and I can tell you that we did lose at the trial court, but we weren't surprised at that. The state attorney general is defending the law. And then in addition to that, Invest in Washington Now, as well as a group of folks is supporting a group called Interveners. These are folks who have standing and have intervened in the lawsuit. So we have organizations like the Edmonds School District, we have some childcare providers, we have some parents, we have some teachers. These are all folks that can say, hey, this is why it's really important that we keep this piece of legislation and that we keep this law on the books. And so they've intervened in the lawsuit. And IWN is helping to support that work. So right now, where the lawsuit is that these 2 lawsuits have been combined into one, and it is moving its way through the legal process. So right now it's at the Division III appellate court level. Both the AG's office as well as the interveners have put in a request for direct review to the Supreme Court. We anticipate that this, that this case will go all the way up through the Supreme Court. Whether or not it takes a step, it continues and takes a step at the appellate court level, it might go to the appellate and then to the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court might decide to just pick it up and hear it directly. Either way, we anticipate having a ruling probably early 2023 on from the Supreme Court on this piece of legislation and through the legal fight. We are feeling incredibly confident and feel really good about our chances, both at the appellate court level as well as at the Supreme Court. There was a lot of work that went into this, almost over 12 years of work, a lot of folks looking at the legislation and the legal pieces, and we feel confident that we will prevail at the end of the day in the legal fight. Now, because a legal fight isn't enough, we also know that about a couple months ago, a small group of very, very wealthy Washingtonians who are opposed to capital gains filed a lawsuit or filed an initiative, Initiative 1929, to try and bring this onto the ballot. And so they're trying to buy their way onto the ballot right now. We know that they have until July 8th to collect 400,000 signatures in order to be able to qualify for the November ballot. We're keeping a really close eye on this and have launched a No on 1929 campaign, which has a broad group of supporters, folks from all the people on this call, as well as the coalition that Emily represents that Balance Our Tax Code. A very significant group of folks who've come together, whether it's childcare providers, teachers, parents, educators, folks like the Children's Alliance, all coming together to speak out in support of the capital gains initiative and to vote no on 1929. As part of that as well, one of the things that we have done at Invest in Washington is to put in place a decline to sign campaign, which is, if you're out there and you see folks out gathering signatures, we're asking folks to take the pledge to decline to sign. And the reason we want to do this is, first of all, we want to make sure that everybody knows and has an awareness around what this initiative would do, and that this initiative, 1929, is simply a attempt by a very few wealthy Washingtonians to try and roll back the capital gains legislation and take over $500 million away from our kids in our schools. So, we've been actively working to move that forward. One of the other things that we've seen, and let's go to the next slide, is as this initiative has been, as it got the ballot title and the language, we've been out and we've been talking to voters, and I think all of us on this call can attest, as we've been doing this work to not only pass the legislation through the legislature, but as we've been continuing to be out in community and talking with folks, we're really hearing that everyday Washingtonians really support capital gains. And those numbers are showing up here, which is, we're seeing that only 40% of likely Washington voters would vote yes on 1929. That's a pretty challenging number. Right there, 39% would say that they would vote no, 20% are unsure. Last year, when we polled on the capital gains tax, 59% of voters said that they supported the capital gains tax. So what we're really seeing is that this very small group of wealthy Washingtonians who are trying to roll back the capital gains is really out of step and out of touch with Washingtonians who really want to make sure that the wealthy are paying their share and that we're investing in our communities and we're taking care of our kids and our schools and we're doing right by our communities. So that's a little bit about where our capital gains is at right now. We still have a couple of fights moving forward, both in terms of the legal fight as well as the initiative fight. And in just a couple of weeks, we'll be able to see if our opponents are actually able to qualify and be on the ballot. So we're keeping our fingers crossed, and you know, we'll be ready to fight if we need to in November, but it's looking good right now. And I think I turn it over to, I will pause there and pass it over to Maggie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having Moms Rising here today. I'm going to keep my section a little shorter than I was planning, just so we have time for questions. My name is Maggie Humphreys. I'm with Moms Rising. We're a grassroots organization advocating with and for parents across the state and across the country. You can go to the next slide, please. And I want to talk a little bit today about, I was asked here to talk about the connection between fixing our tax code and what that actually means for Washington families. Too often when we're talking about taxes, we get so focused on marginal rates and policy solutions, we lose focus of what we're actually trying to do. And that's reckoning with the reality that we have abundant wealth in this state and in this country, yet we have huge problems that could be solved if only we would invest in them and put the money into those programs that they need. And here in Washington, we're starting to do that with childcare. If you are a parent or know a parent, you have heard all about how expensive childcare is in this country, in this state, and particularly in King County. In Washington, childcare costs more than our public and state tuition at UW. But we have started to tackle the childcare in Washington state with the capital gains tax. What is lesser known about the capital gains tax is that when we passed it, we also passed the Fair Start for Kids Act. If you can go to the next slide, please, which is the largest investment in childcare that Washington state has ever made. And what is truly incredible about this is that the effects of this legislation are already being felt in Washington. I work with moms and dads across the state and hear their experiences and stories of trying to navigate work and family here in Washington. One story that always sticks with me is a mom, I'll call her Laura from Federal Way, who needed a few $100s to fix her car. Because she couldn't fix her car, she couldn't get to work. Because she couldn't get to work, she lost her job. Because she lost her job, she lost her qualification for childcare. And because she didn't have childcare, she was having an impossible time finding a new job, which she also needed a car to get to. Policies like the Fair Start for Kids Act and the Working Families Tax Credit that are going to put dollars back into the pockets of families are what we need to ensure that families have what they need, not to just survive, but to thrive. And a big part of what the Fair Start for Kids Act did was massively expand the number of families who are eligible for childcare subsidies in Washington state. A Moms Rising member out in Eastern Washington, who's a preschool teacher herself and mom of 3, has never been eligible for childcare support, even though she's a single mom and works in a low-wage job as a preschool teacher. But thanks to this legislation, she's now receiving slots for all of her kids, and that is making a huge difference in her family's financial security and her ability to put more money away for food, for other bills, and for taking care of her family. But without the capital gains tax, these new expansions will go away. And we know that there's so much more work to do to fix childcare, to fix education for all families across our state. The Fair Start for Kids Act was just a start, and there's so much more work to do, but none of that work can happen unless we have adequate revenue. So I tried to I know I just said a lot very quickly, but I wanted to save time for questions. So I'll stop there and just want to thank you all for engaging in this work and being here today.
Thank you, Maggie. That's so important to know what the impact will be. I know we are over time. If you're able to stay and you have questions, please do. I'm gonna just blow through everything else I was gonna say. I wanted to talk a little bit about how our tech workers and our industry fits into this. So as I don't think I need to tell anyone here, tech has seen explosive growth here. And especially during the pandemic, tech companies have seen even more growth, with the top tech companies increasing 70% of their valuation during the pandemic. That has resulted in rising median incomes in Seattle. They're now over $100,000. So again, we know not everyone in the tech world is the same, but the average software engineer salary is coming in over $130,000. So that's definitely contributing to the growing wealth gaps. And yet we know a lot of tech workers are having trouble finding housing within their budgets and affordable childcare. So what must it be like to be in Seattle under, you know, the 25% of the population living less than $50,000 a year? So the problem is the tech industry voices that normally are heard the loudest are the lobbying organizations representing corporations and executives, and not the much larger population that is employed by them. I'm not going to go too much into this. This is just a timeline that shows some of the recent pushback from corporations against progressive taxation efforts. Here in Seattle, the most recent example is the Jumpstart tax, which has passed and has raised $231 million for affordable housing. And tech has continued to grow and be strong here. So what we need is a strong unified voice from the tech sector that doesn't agree with the corporate lobbyists. We need the people who believe that those who've benefited the most pay their fair share so that we can invest back into the community as a whole. And we actually all benefit in many ways when everyone is supported, even the corporations, from people having more money in their pocket to spend to educating future workers. So no one here is proposing gouging the wealthy or corporations. We're just asking for fairness. And we know tech workers care. I've already put the action items we have for today in the chat because I knew we were running out of time. We know that a lot of people want to get involved. I've put the link to decline to sign in the chat. If you want to take a minute right now, it just takes 30 seconds to commit to not sign this initiative if it does come here, and to make it harder for them to get on the ballot. I've also put a link to a form where you can submit for Tech for Housing if you want to learn more and get involved with us. I'm also going to throw my email in the chat if you want to just have a conversation first. But we have a lot of activities from passive to, you know, really involved that you can, you know, dive in with us, and we're really interested to have others come and shape our work as well. And then we have a really generous offer to match up to $1,000 today for donations to balance our tax code from a fellow tech worker. So if that's something you're interested in, we know a lot of people prefer to do that. You know, you're short on time. So if you do want to do that, go to balanceourtaxcode.com. I've already put in that link into the chat as well. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to all our speakers. I'm going to go to see if there's any questions right now. I think, let's see. Which senator helped block the tax bill mentioned in the timeline? Anyone want to speak to that?
This is Suresh from Tech for Housing. I could speak a little bit about that. That was Senator Guy Palumbo, Washington State Senator Guy Palumbo. And then immediately after that session ended, that state legislative session ended, he resigned from the state legislature and went to go back to work for Amazon as its chief lobbyist in Washington State. In most states, that is illegal. It is illegal for a legislator to lobby their former colleagues until a 1 or 2 year time period has elapsed.
Thanks, Suresh. You're also welcome to come off mute if you have a question for our panel. To anyone, I wasn't monitoring the chat the whole time, so I don't know if anyone else has seen any other questions come through. I saw one about the initiative the text, which has been shared in the chat.
I'm happy to answer this question from Brian in the chat as well about the wealth tax. Thanks for that question, Brian. As folks have mentioned, that we've been talking about doing a wealth tax, which would be a 1 cent tax on every dollar over $1 billion was the initial proposal we brought forward. That said, there are a lot of different ways to tax wealth, and folks are thinking creatively. You know, I think, as I won't talk down to this group because I think there's a really high understanding, but as folks know, people are less and less relying on income and have a lot more intangible assets where wealth is concerned. And so there's some creative thinking happening about how do we actually tax wealth in this current economy we live in, which looks really different than obviously it did, 100 years ago. And so wealth taxes across the nation are kind of popping up and they all look a little different. Here in Washington, we're definitely talking about a different broader base than $1 billion. And that mechanism could go up or down. Some states are looking at 50 million as the line. Some states are looking at $1 billion. Here in Washington, I would imagine we will come forward actually this next session with a proposal that is lower than $1 billion. I think we're exploring kind of where the best line is for that based on what Department of Revenue tracks and sort of how we can assess the data best. But I would imagine that a lower threshold is in the future, and that will allow us to fund more important work that we care about. Thanks for that question.
Also asking about the method for taxing large loans against stocks.
That's been on my sort of to-do list to explore that as well. We've all got sort of like a hard lesson recently in how that has been used to evade taxes nationally. And there's so that I know a lot of organizations are looking into closing that particular loophole, and could we do the same thing in Washington? So good flag on that one. And yeah, it's a big egregious loophole.
Based on these questions, I'm thinking that Andy and I should just have a listening session with everyone so you can tell us all the policy proposals we should be thinking about, because these are very good questions and really important loopholes.
Scott is asking, is there a way to capture the potential gains in real estate from a broad upzone across Washington?
I'm not entirely sure what an upzone across Washington is. There is one of the, I think, good reasons for exempting real estate from the capital gains tax is that we already have a robust and very equitable real estate excise tax, which is when you sell a piece of real estate, you pay a tax on the sale price, essentially. And what the capital gains tax really does is apply that same logic to intangible assets when you the profit from selling a share of stock or a bond. And actually, the legislature recently, in the last 5 years, made that real estate excise tax. They applied a graduated rate structure to it, made it a more equitable instrument, and so it's a good tool that it's sort of dwarfed by the regressive sales and other taxes in there, but we do have some good tools that we can build on, and that's certainly one of them.
Any other questions?
Yeah, on the land value tax, that's another on my to-do list to look more into. I know there's been some real looking into that, and I don't have a lot of information about it, but I know it's yet another interesting option to explore.
We'll give another minute here to see if there's anything else. I just want to say also thank you. There's a number of people who help with this outside of the panelists. So Beth Lindsay at Invest in Washington Now, Suresh I've already mentioned, a mentor and friend of mine, Laura Lowe at Share the Cities, has been really helpful in helping me navigate this new world as well. So thank you. And then Rainey Cohen has helped us in putting together some of our agenda and content. So a lot of people behind the scenes that we're really appreciative of. Suresh is asking, the Washington Supreme Court rules that income is not property when hearing the legal challenge to the capital gains tax. What tax policies would your organizations recommend?
That's $1 million question, isn't it? This is that piece where, and I think even the questions that we were hearing earlier that Andy was doing such a great job of answering is that, yeah, multi-million, is that our tax code is, our tax code is just so antiquated, and we're way past time in needing to, bring it up to speed, to make it, to connect it with the economy that we have now, the way that people make money, the way that we raise money, the way that we spend money, all of these pieces, just, the way our economy works and the way our society works is very different than, when so many pieces of our tax code that were put in place, which was back, about the 1930s, it's about 100 years old. It's just, so many things have moved and shifted. And so there's a lot of different pieces. And, I think that's a really good question. It's one of the pieces that we, as a, broad coalition and group of folks are having some really, serious conversations about, especially as we move forward. It's not, and I think that's one of the things that we're seeing as part of this conversation. We know that it was incredible work to be able to pass the capital gains tax, and that it took us over a decade in order to be able to do that. We don't want it to take another decade to pass the next piece, because we know that Washingtonians can't wait that long. But we also know that it's going to take a series of different things. There's not going to be just one thing that's going to fix this whole issue. It's going to take a series of policies to really help us modernize our tax code and fix it so we can flip it around so it's no longer upside down, and we can make sure that folks are, paying what they owe, and that folks at the lower and middle income are not carrying the bulk of the weight. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I totally echo what Treasure's saying. And I'll chime in and say too, that, it took us a long time to pass those, as Treasure and I both know, but I do think there's a real opportunity too, like, not just because we've passed some really meaningful policy in the last few years, but obviously the work I do is deeply connected to all of this different community work and direct service work. And I think that folks have a unique understanding at this moment of time, kind of about how government works, about how these like collective investments function. I think the pandemic has really shifted how people across the United States, frankly, and in Washington relate to those systems and understand them and think about them. And I think, the pandemic has been a really difficult and ugly time for a lot of people, but I also think it's been an awakening about the way in which we are actually, in fact, interconnected and interdependent on one another, and how these systems are critical for creating a really strong safety net. Because what we know is that this is not going to be the only challenge we face. As Andy said, he's had 2 historic economic recessions just during his tenure at the single job. So we know that hard times are part of what happens when we live in community. And so we also know that we need infrastructure to support those hard times. And I think folks are in this unique moment in Washington where they actually like really understand that. And I think we have a lot of momentum behind this work. So we just kind of have to funnel it and mobilize it, which is really exciting.
Can I add to that really quickly? And I think what's even more exciting and hopeful in that is that we have started to build that infrastructure. These aren't pipe dreams. We've built a paid family and medical leave system, unlike any other technology or policy system in the state. We're building out the infrastructure and system of a working family's tax credit that will be able to cut checks to working people across the state. We're expanding childcare. So we really have these systems coming online that we can build to scale to address these big problems we're talking about. And to me, that's really hopeful and exciting, because the work has been done, and we can just, at the point that we can just expand upon it.
Which Maggie deserves enormous credit for a lot of that work, y'all. She has done so much great advocacy, and we appreciate her.
All right. Thank you all so much again for your time and attention. We hope to do, a in-person meetup maybe for those who are interested in a few weeks or a month or so, now that the weather's getting nice. We'd love to meet some of you, spend more time talking, maybe invite some other exciting guests. So stay tuned. Again, we'll send out all these links and forms and stuff for you to see afterwards via email. So thanks again for taking your lunch break. I know you have busy days. It's been really fun. Hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.